Hello, everyone. Welcome to my February art history little lecture. This month, we're going to be talking about Fauvism, thanks to Al Masak. He is the one that suggested it, so I really appreciate that. Lets me know what you guys want to know about a little bit more. So here we go. So most of the time when we think about Fauvism, we think of Henri Matisse. He is one of pretty much the founder, and he is the one that stuck with this particular style all throughout his career. So just a little background on Fauvism in general. So Fauvism was the first of the avant-garde movements that flourished in France in the early 20th century. The Fauve painters were the first to break with Impressionism, as well with the older traditional methods of perception. Their spontaneous and often very subjective response to nature was expressed in bold, vibrant colors, typically colors straight from the tube. So they did not mix colors, but because of all of the new inventions and ways of producing paint and pigment, they just used it straight from the tube. So the two on your screen, or two that we're looking at right now, is Matisse and Derain. And they introduced unnaturalistic color and vivid brush strokes into their paintings in the summer of 1905. So the one on the right, Derain, that one is in 1905, so this is an early one. And you can see there's still some naturalistic colors. We can see the hill in the background is green, the sky is blue. The people are, like the more earthy skin tones. But on the left, just a year later, which there's a question mark there, but we can really see how that unnaturalistic color took off between these two individuals. I also want to point out, this is a side note, Van Gogh and Gauguin really did use some unnaturalistic colors as well. And that was a little bit before the 20th century. So I think they may have been a pretty big influence on these two individuals in general. So both Matisse and Derain worked together in this Collioure village in France on the Mediterranean coast. Their pictures were exhibited later that year in this autumn salon in Paris, and this was the one that Matisse had entered into the exhibit. And this is I wanted to show this one too. This is an earlier version of the beginnings of Fauvism. You can really see here the influence of Neo-Impressionism and Impressionism in general with these brush strokes, the short brush strokes that you can see. And we do, like I said, have some naturalistic color with the reflection of the sky and the water, the tree colors, etc. The name Fauvism comes from a critic by the name of Louis Vaucel, and he called them fauves, wild, and that means wild beasts in English, in his review for the magazine Gil Blas. And then that term was then attributed to the artists themselves later. All right, so the Fauves were a loosely shaped group of artists, and they shared a similar approach to nature, but they had no really definitive program that they followed. Their leader was Matisse, as we probably anticipated, who had arrived at the Fauve style after experimenting with post-impressionism, Van Gogh, Gauguin, Cézanne, Neo-Impressionism with Seurat, Signac, and Cros. And these influences inspired him to reject the traditional three-dimensional space that typically artists utilized. And he sought a new picture plane instead that was defined by the movement of color planes. So this is going to be the primary piece that we talk about with Matisse. So this piece is entitled Joy of Life. And Matisse employed very flowing and flexible lines here. You can see the tree trunks are so organic. And just the colors blend into one another, and it's beautiful. Although the vivacious colors and the spacious and open setting is there, it does convey a wonderful sense of well-being and just exuding happiness. And seen from its historical perspective, it is the summation of Fauvism and Fauvist painting. The subject of the Joy of Life is human happiness in a golden age. And it continues a pictorial theme that was dear to the Renaissance, which had passed down through the centuries in this 19th century with Ingres. And then other painters as well. So Matisse had made a pastoral garden of the gods, basically here. Nude men and women, and they were following their joyful instincts. Some of them are relaxing, some of them are playing, some of them are dancing, etc. He separated object from object and object from space. And they all played off of one another with these different color nuances. The Joy of Life was begun in 1905, as you see in those years. And then it was done in time to be exhibited in the Independent Salon of 1906. And then it was acquired and purchased by Leo and Gertrude Stein. And if that name sounds familiar, if you're an art history buff, I challenge you to think about for a second who is attributed with Gertrude Stein. So I'll give you a second. It was Pablo Picasso. And Pablo Picasso was a regular visitor of Leo and Gertrude's. And art historians conclude that Picasso respected Matisse and was particularly impressed with this piece of his. The first sketch of one of his most famous pieces, Demoiselle d'Avignon, was begun in late 1906. And then it was completed the following year in 1907, the complete painting. This left behind all of his optimistic spirit of his rose period. If you know anything about Picasso, he had three major periods in his life. He had his blue period. Well, I guess maybe more than that, because there was a first period where he almost dabbled with Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. And then he got into his blue period after his best friend had passed away. And he painted all these monochromatic blue paintings that were really just focused on melancholy and sadness. And then he moved on to his rose period that focused on more optimistic themes and marginalized people and a lighter color scheme. And then he gets into Cubism, him and Georges Braque. So Picasso, in this piece, like Matisse, has a group of nude figures. And that's really where similarities end here, except for one that we'll talk about. Picasso's nudes stand in this congested, airless kind of space, where in Matisse's we have this big open garden, right? Matisse's lines are organic and curvilinear and colorful, and Picasso's are very geometric and angular and sharp. The rose period palette we still kind of see here, but it is darkened. He's using more grays, he's using black and tan. And the bodies almost look carnivorous, and they look pretty unhealthy compared to those in Matisse's. The damsels in the piece by Picasso's of Avignon exude an atmosphere of tension and ugliness. And basically, Picasso's Demoiselle d'Avignon is a vicious satire of Matisse's. But if we look closely, my picture is kind of covering up one of them. we see this same pose by two women. Picasso adopted this from Matisse in his Demoiselle. And Matisse actually adopted it from Cézanne, who adopted it from Ingres. And he probably pulled it from somewhere else, and it goes all the way back to the Renaissance. And this is the kind of stuff that I love looking at in art history, because you can see all of the influences, you can see the lineages of artists by things like this and who they were inspired by. I just think it's so, so cool. Cézanne uses this pose in his Four Bathers, which is here. And so you can look at the date here. This is 1890 compared to 1905 and 1906. So about 15 to 20 years earlier. 15. So here's them all side by side. Going the wrong way in my notes. Sorry about that. Okay, so with the elbows above the head, and hands folded behind the neck, this pose was frequently used by Cézanne, so all the way to the right-hand side, in many of his paintings, both of male and of female subjects. When Matisse adopted the pose, he used it in a state of relaxation for his pastoral garden, almost suggesting like a yawn and stretching. Matisse is a nymph with ivy garland, so that's what's going down her body. And she just exudes this happiness. We seem happy when we're looking at it. Now, when we move to the middle with Picasso, he was also obviously influenced by Cézanne, even if it's through lineage. And he, after the exhibits of 1905, 1906, and 1907, became more influenced by Cézanne and some of his particular elements of painting. And he combined Matisse and Cézanne. So Picasso in the middle was combining that of Matisse and Cézanne. With Picasso, this figure and pose underwent a huge metamorphosis, and it's charged with tension, and she's frozen in inactivity, and she's looking directly at the viewer with these big eyes. This pose is quite an extraordinary sequence, going from Cézanne to Matisse to Picasso. In Cézanne, we have we have this bather. She's just bathing herself. In Matisse, we have this female who is just happy in this garden with all these other people who are just relaxing and living in the moment. And then we have this violent paradox of Picasso, of the misery of life, the complete opposite of Matisse's. And it follows from post-impressionism to Fauvism to Cubism, and probably forward if we were to look at some more pieces. So that is just one thing that I wanted to show, that Fauvism was inspired and influenced by previous periods, but also influenced more forward periods. And so here's just another piece of Matisse's to finish us off. All right, so most of the Fauves, in their style of this subjective response to nature, that was expressed in like these bold colors, vibrant colors, brush strokes directly from the tube kind of thing. This was a transitional and it was full of learning for these artists. By 1908, so if you remember, The Joy of Life was in 1905 to 1906. So just a few years later, in 1908, a revived interest in Cézanne's work. The order and structure of nature led many of them to reject the emotionalism that Fauvism was in favor of over the logic of Cubism. They liked the logic. And that's a theme that we really see a lot in art history, as we go from this very emotional and abstract and colorful back to the logic and order and structure of everyday life. And then we go back to the emotional. So we really go through these phases. It's almost every other. And that's another thing that I love exploring, to just see how those influence one another and how one period goes into another, goes into another. All right, so back to my notes. They rejected Fauvism in favor of Cubism. Deren, so not Matisse, but Deren, he did flirt with Cubism. He experimented with it, wanted to check it out more, but he did eventually become a pretty popular painter in a neoclassical style. So going back to the classical kind of period, this new classical where mythology was pretty big, and looking back to the classic Greek and Roman art. Matisse alone pursued the course of Fauvism that he pioneered. And he achieved this sophisticated balance between emotions and the world that he painted. So I think that's the end of my slideshow. Here's just a couple of references that I had used. But I hope that that gives you a little bit of a glimpse of Fauvism. It's nothing, I didn't go too in depth, but it's a period of art that I have not studied yet, which is so interesting because I am such a big color. I love studying color. I love studying how artists use color, and Fauvism is huge in that. So I'm excited that I was able to look into this a little bit more and learn more about it that I did not know. So I hope you enjoyed. If you have any other suggestions, please put them below in the comments, and I will see you in March with a new topic and presentation. Have a wonderful day.